Hello and welcome to WLC 414 Module 2. In this module we're going to continue our discussion of the Romance languages, even though we obviously are not going to discuss all of them, just a few. And then we will also talk about dialects and social variation in language, because this is very important for language change. Alright, so now we're going to talk about Portuguese. We will see that basically there is a Galician dialect of Northwest Iberia. It's part of Spain, actually, and this is the origin of Portuguese. And when it became politically independent from Spain, then we had a major world language. All right, most of Portuguese speakers are in Brazil, which we're going to return to in just a minute. Then we have some in Angola and Mozambique, and then we have some in Portugal itself. But as you can see, the majority of Portuguese speakers do not reside in Portugal. So if we take a look at this map, the area just above Portugal is where Galician was spoken. And again, this is the root of Portuguese. This is a more detailed map from your textbook, and it actually talks about Western Galician, Eastern Galician, and then it talks about Portuguese. So 1 and 2 are Galician, and then 3, 4, 5, and 6 are Portuguese. This is more detailed than we need to go into, but it just shows you more specifically where Galician begins and Portuguese begins. There is a misconception that if you understand Spanish, you understand Portuguese. Well, this is certainly not true. If we have the written language, because 95% of the lexicon is shared, and by shared I mean shared, I do not mean identical. That's one thing, but spoken Portuguese, we simply can't understand it unless we do speak Portuguese. So cut and paste this link, listen to it, this is the text, listen to it with your eyes closed first, and then listen to it reading it. And that would be for obviously the Spanish speakers. And you'll find that it is definitely a different language. Alright, so Portuguese then is spoken by 178 million speakers, and there are 163 who live in Brazil. And again, we just saw this on the map. So when we talk about linguistics, Romance linguistics, for example, we have to distinguish between European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese. During the Middle Ages, many, especially the literate inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula, were bilingual. So Portuguese was used for lyrical poetry, as it was considered to be softer, and Castilian was used for epic poetry, poetry of heroes and war, because it was considered to be more virile. There is a deep-rooted hostility with Spain that still exists. Only in the 17th century did Portuguese create a standard after a period of Spanish rule. I went to a conference in Braga, Portugal, a few years back, and when the Spaniards spoke Spanish to the Portuguese, whether or not they spoke Spanish, they answered in English. And the way I know they spoke Spanish is because how could they answer at all if they didn't understand? I noticed that I, as an American, had better treatment in shops and such as they did. I mean, they weren't overtly rude. It's a lovely populace, but you could see that there was still certain hostility. All right, so we have a diversity of dialects, and we have, Portugal was called Lusitania under the Romans, and since Portugal joined the European Union, the literacy has improved greatly in the population. Brazil, in the case of Brazil, what we have is colonization by Portugal that began in the 16th century. We have, as we know what this is now, a substratum effect with many of the indigenous languages, especially the language Tupi. So this influenced Brazil. So we see that we have an influence on Brazilian Portuguese that we simply did not have on European Portuguese. And that's going to spur the development of a different dialect. And again, we've said this several times, but we do have different dialects from European Portuguese. It's interesting that despite the size of the country, Brazil actually has only 2 main dialects of Portuguese. All right, now we're going to switch to Italian, and Italian is one of the Eastern Romance languages. So the languages that we have studied heretofore are the Western Romance languages. And you'll see on the map that's on the next page that there is what we call a Spezia Rimini line, and that basically connects these 2 cities. And the reason why this is linguistically significant is that languages and dialects to the north, and they form part of a dialect where they show voicing of internal voiceless consonants, and those to the south and the east do not. So what on earth does that mean? We haven't discussed this, so it may sound very confusing. When you pronounce a voiced consonant, just put your finger on your Adam's apple and say b and make it longer somehow. Don't pronounce a vowel because it doesn't help. Or d or b. You can feel vibration actually in your entire vocal tract. On the other hand, a voiceless consonant like p, k, t, it sounds like you're whispering. And the reason it sounds like you're whispering is because there's no vibration at the vocal cords. So we're going to find a very few voiced consonants in Italian and the other Romance languages to the east. And we're going to find quite a bit of voicing and even other changes in the Western Romance languages. Here is what we were talking about, the Spezia Rimini line. And again, we can see that languages and dialects to the south are going to show no voicing, and dialects to the north are going to show voicing. All right, some examples about this then. We have vita from Latin, and this goes to Spanish vida. Don't worry about the symbols, but that's what it is. French V, and the point here is that T between vowels is intervocalic. You can see that's changed in Spanish. It's not even a de, it's changed to a the, vida, and in French, which is the most innovative of the Romance languages, and that means it's changed the most, it just disappears, vivi. In Italian, on the other hand, keeps the T, vita. The same thing can be seen with lupus. In Spanish, you voice it to b, and then it becomes actually a fricative, which we'll talk about later, but it is lobo. French, again, just deletes it, lou. Doesn't matter what the spelling is. French pronounces it as lou. Italian, on the other hand, pronounces lupo. Amicus, in Spanish, we're looking at this k, right? We have amigo, and in French, we just have ami. Again, you can see that French is the most innovative of the languages. Italian, on the other hand, keeps amico. There are some words in Italian that have some voicing, and those are borrowings from the northern dialect. So from pater in Latin, we get padre in Italian, and those are borrowings from the northern dialects. By and large, Eastern Romance languages that are Eastern Romance languages do not show voicing, and Italian is a very good example. There are hundreds of dialects in Italy. We're going to talk about dialects a bit later in this module, but they have always thrived. So if you ask them what language they speak, they will tell you they speak Sicilian. They will tell you they speak Brindisi, for example. In 1860, only 2.5% of the population said Italian when they were asked, and 40% now say that. Why did this happen? Well, first of all, we need to understand that the standard language is based on Tuscan, and that's the language of Florence, but that's literary Italian. The reason is there was a reconquest of Spain, which we're going to talk about, we talked about a little bit already, and then there's a post-revolutionary fervor of France. After 1789, France wanted to become united in one country, and that's where Occitan was supplanted by the dialect that was originally Francien. The reconquest of Spain, as we know, began in those Burgos, and it imposed Castilian, which again we have discussed. But in Italy, there was nothing like that. The country was only formed politically, unified politically, in 1861. And so there was the question of a national language then. We had to have a national language, which was called Questione della Lingua. And there was a statement that said, we have made Italy, now we must make Italians. So that's a very different view from we must all be united, for example, in France. All right, so again, we've said that Tuscan is the dialect that is used, more specifically modern Florentine, and this is used as a standard. There is a strong prescriptivist current, and what that means is they're in school, variants are considered very harshly, and they want to impose the standard. So literate Italians will know Tuscan, but on the other hand, what do? They engage in code switching. So code switching is a mixture of grammatical systems and switching between two languages. Wherever bilinguals exist, there is code switching. We see code switching in Spanish, for example. There is a famous article that says, sometimes I begin a sentence in English y la termino en español. Okay, so sometimes I begin a sentence in English, and then I finish it in Spanish. That's very typical for code switching. It's known as Spanglish. I detest that term because that is pejorative. Again, anywhere there are bilinguals, there is code switching. All right, so how many speakers do we have? We have over 62 million, but obviously it does not have the geographic diffusion of French or Spanish. In Italy, we have the bulk of the speakers, 55 million. In Switzerland, we have Ticino, which has 250,000. Corsica has about 240,000 speakers. Interestingly enough, obviously we have Malta, which is an island south of Italy. Australia, interestingly enough, has 500,000 speakers, and so does Toronto. So we offer Spanish as a heritage language. For example, if you grow up speaking Spanish, in Canada, in Toronto, they will teach Italian as a heritage language because so many speakers grow up speaking Spanish. There are also 1.5 million speakers in Argentina, and there are 15 million speakers of Italian in Brazil. We will continue this discussion in the next video.